Canada is a big country, but in truth, most of us live along the southern border and mostly in cities. That means during a federal election campaign, issues such as transit, housing, and affordability translate into complicated cross-jurisdictional problems. Here to help us understand what the parties are offering on key urban priorities, we welcome Barry Verbanovich. He is the mayor of Kitchener and past president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Jennifer Keesmaat, former chief planner for the City of Toronto, now CEO of the Keesmaat Group. Murtaza Haider, professor of real estate management and the director of the Ryerson Urban Analytics Institute. And Stephen Eyre. He is president and co-founder of Common Good Strategies Consulting and the lead author and researcher of Toronto Foundation's annual Vital Signs Report. And it's good to welcome everybody around our table here. You came a few subway stops away, so it was no sweat for you to get here.
No sweat for me.
Your worship, how long did it take you to get here today?
About 2 hours and 15 minutes.
From Kitchener-Waterloo to Midtown Toronto.
You got it.
2:15.
It was painful.
I'll bet it was. Well, to that end, let's talk about some of these issues, including transportation. And Stephen, I want to go to you first, because the Vital Signs Report that comes out every year is really a great snapshot of what the big issues are in the city of Toronto, the capital city of the province. In your view, what were the main highlights of the report this year?
Yeah, we had a couple really interesting highlights. And one of the key emphases that we found this year was the growing inequality in the city. So just starting off, I think many people are familiar with the idea that we're getting more and more unequal. What really surprised me was just the extent of it. So when we look at the top 1% over the last 35 years, adjusting for inflation, we can see that the top 1% have had their income go up by $99,000 in the city, whereas the bottom 50% have had their income from things like employment and investments go down by about $6,000. So the population's aging, so it's not a perfect measure. There's more people who are on old age security and things like that as a big portion of their income. But we can see there's a pretty substantial portion of the population that's really been struggling. At the same time, we've seen that the quality of jobs is getting much worse in the last decade. Temporary jobs grew 5 times faster than permanent jobs in the city. Self-employment increased 3 times faster than permanent jobs, and part-time jobs increased 3 times faster as well.
Can you just take us 10 years into the future, or 20 years into the future, and if this trend continues, where the rich keep getting a lot richer, excuse me, and the less well-off keep getting less well-off, what does that portend?
I think there's a lot of real issues. Talking to people now, and as part of the research we did, we consulted with a number of grassroots leaders from some of the lowest income communities. People were telling us they're already really struggling. They can't pay their bills, like people living paycheck to paycheck, and people who are in these temporary jobs, like if they miss a paycheck, or if they find that their job's eliminated, like they're already really, really struggling. So when we take that forward another 10 years, I think if we saw the same trends continue, it's going to be a pretty bad situation for many people in the city.
That's the situation in the capital city. I want to go to Kitchener-Waterloo, which is a big, it's a big region of the province. A lot of people live there. When the story of Kitchener is told, in terms of housing, in terms of wages, in terms of jobs, what does that story look like right now?
Right now, Steve, the story is actually looking very good. We have amongst the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and also amongst the highest employment rate. But that isn't happening without some challenges. Certainly those that are transitioning away from some of our traditional manufacturing, particularly those in an older demographic, are struggling in terms of figuring out what they should do as some of the old jobs of yesterday are gone. And we're also seeing a lot of people working in the service economy. And so we want to make sure that as we see many people be successful working in our tech and innovation and advanced manufacturing companies, we also want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along going forward.
Now, I get it. You're the mayor of this city, and you got to be a bit of a booster. I get that.
Absolutely.
I get that. But having said that, we know what's happened to manufacturing in Kitchener over the last 20 years, and it's not a pleasant picture in many ways. Having also said that, you're the past head of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, so you've got a sense about the way these issues play across the whole country.
Absolutely.
Fill us in on that score.
You know what? I mean, we're really focusing on a variety of areas because we think they're key to keep the economy going and making sure that together we're building better lives for Canadians. So our asks of all of the political parties in this election have focused on a number of key areas. First of all, a permanent doubling of the gas tax, which would mean over $2 billion of predictable funding each and every year for municipalities going forward. A permanent transit fund. Right now, the fund that's in place exists for 10 years. We've looked to see that continue for another 10 years. So municipalities making transformational investments in transit can continue to focus on that going forward. Housing affordability is a key area, particularly in terms of supportive and Indigenous housing. And finally, looking at areas around climate change. And we had an ask of $22 billion over the next 14 years to help us deal with issues of climate adaptation and mitigation in our communities.
A year and a half ago, do you remember what you were doing?
I do.
You were running for mayor of Toronto. And in that effort, you were trying to bring attention to some issues that you thought were particularly key that we happen to be talking about now during a federal election campaign. What concerned you the most as you were running a year and a half ago?
Well, you know, Barry really hit on all three. It's housing affordability, it's transit access, and then it's mitigating the impacts of climate change. Those are really the three key ones. And if you think about some of what Steve has said with respect to the growing gap between the rich and the poor in the city, which is a 30 or 40-year trend line, which is accelerating right now, one of the really big issues in there is access to housing and housing affordability. And in particular, we know what's happened in the Toronto context, but it's happened across the GTA, in Kitchener, it's really happened coast to coast, is that we've seen an influx of investors into the housing market, which has essentially meant the detachment of local wages from the cost of housing. And as a result, you know, some of the measures that have been proposed in this campaign, like extending the amount of debt, allowing more access to more debt, is really problematic, because when you have housing that is 12 times the cost of average wages, which is what's happening across this country. Just for some context, when my mom and dad bought a house in 1970, they were both 20 years old. They were 20 and 21 years old.
In what city?
In Hamilton.
In Hamilton. Okay.
Their cost of their house was 2 times my dad's annual salary. Today, the average is 12 times. When I bought my first home, it was 5 times. So we're in a situation right now where this isn't just about providing more access to more debt. It's unsustainable for Canadians to be taking on that much debt. We have more debt than any other country in the G7, 4 times that of our American cousins on a per capita basis. So we need to be looking at supply. We need to be addressing supply in a fundamentally different way. And part of our supply measures need to include addressing vacant homes. We know that there are a significant number of vacant homes, some estimates as high as 1 in 8 in cities like Toronto and Vancouver sitting empty. We need to address vacant homes, and we need to have supply-driven measures. It's not just about the cost, it's about more access to housing.
More on that to come. Murtaza, how do you see it from your perch at Ryerson?
I think the supply side solutions are the only way out of this housing affordability challenge. I think investors do play a big role in housing. That's where Jennifer and I have a slight departure. You look at Montreal, 2/3 of Montrealers rent, right? They are not renting from government, they are renting from investors. And Montreal happens to be much more affordable than Toronto. So that argument that investors providing real estate, rental real estate, would make the rental real estate or housing more expensive does not hold true for Montreal, which is the most city with most renters in Canada. There's no other city with that kind of rental numbers. The second thing is that we have to look at the fact that nowhere else the problem of housing affordability has been fixed by not addressing supply side. And the more difficult we make for builders to build, the more regulatory burdens we create, the more difficulties we create for accessing land or developing it, or regulations that permit what the planners may want to build, but what the society wants or people would like to see, that kind of things would create land supply issues more acute. And this is not to say that build suburbia everywhere. This is to say that bring realistic development plans forward and help people deal with it. The other thing is you have to realize, if you put affordability, there's 2 variables in housing affordability problem. One is housing price, the other one is wages. If your incomes are rising in step with housing prices, then you wouldn't have as much of an affordability problem. What has happened with our cities and what has happened with our economy is that our incomes have been almost stagnant. Right? So if you look at the median household incomes, in Toronto, it's about $83,000. And in the suburbs, it would be higher The median household income of census families, is higher in the suburbs than in Toronto. And obviously, that is a variable in your two-variable affordability problem. So what the governments have to do is to look not just at providing jobs, but at the quality of jobs, well-paying jobs that have the kind of wages it pays for people to be able to afford to rent or buy.
We're going to give some bullet point highlights right now of what the four major parties have on offer. This is the Liberals, Conservatives, New Democrats, and Greens. And we're going to bring this, Sheldon, if you would, we'll bring up these graphics and see what they've got to say on the issue of housing. For the Liberals, they're talking about 100,000 affordable homes over the course of a decade. They want to expand their first-time home buyer subsidies, where the government is contributing 10% on new home purchases and 5% on resales, the idea being to expand helping people in the more expensive markets in the country. And they want a surtax on absentee foreign owners. Province of Ontario brought one of those in not too long ago. The Conservatives, they want to cut red tape to make approval of new developments easier. They want to raise the limits to allow for 30-year mortgages, and they want to review the stress test situation. The New Democrats talk about 500,000 affordable homes over the course of a decade. They would like to subsidize rental accommodation. They want to offer tax breaks for developers to build new affordable units. They're also talking about 30-year mortgages insured by CMHC and a 15% surtax on foreign buyers. And finally, the Green Party of Canada talks about 25,000 new affordable units, 15,000 renovated every year for the next 10 years, and make housing, quote, a legally protected fundamental human right for all Canadians. And presumably there'd be some discussion about what that exactly means. Okay, that's in a nutshell, obviously not in exhaustive detail, but in a nutshell, what's on offer in this election campaign. And without asking any of you to be particularly partisan in any way, I wonder if you just sort of point to what you like. Steve.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that everyone mentioned around the panel, like in their introductory comments, is the need for more supply. So there's a number of things in there trying to increase the supply. In terms of the actual numbers, I mean, just to put a context in terms of the City of Toronto, our report highlighted the City of Toronto itself last year added 77,000 people, our record high by a large margin. The year before was our previous record, and we were only able to build about 11,000 new rental units. I mean, that gap is pretty substantial. I mean, in terms of some of these numbers spread across the entire country, some of the gap we're seeing right now is already pretty substantial. When you look at some of those numbers over time, there's a real question of like how quickly can we get them into our supply and whether it'll actually be enough even with some of the different platforms.
Mayor Verbanovich, what do you like?
You know, I think there's a number of things there that are certainly good. I mean, as you know, we fought long and hard to actually get a national housing strategy and finally saw that happen during this past term. A lot of the funding was back-ended, and so seeing some of what's on offer is important. I think for us, anything that would see improvements, particularly around supportive housing, because that not only allows us to deal with the housing issue at the lowest end of the continuum, but also gets those folks support in terms of mental health, addictions, and so on, which are challenges that, as you know, we're dealing with in our communities, whether it's the opioid crisis or others. Secondly, we know many of our cities are dealing with Indigenous housing solutions. If we want to lift people out of poverty, it's making sure the most basic need is being looked after. And so ensuring that the needs of that community is being dealt with is absolutely essential. And finally, I think anything that would allow us to see rental housing preserved and updated is key, because we can't afford to take any steps backward. In fact, we need to look after what we have and build new housing to make some inroads. We have a waiting list that for certain types of housing is upwards of 7 years in Waterloo region. And quite frankly, that's not acceptable. And so we need to see more funding front-ended.
Jennifer, what do you like?
Well, if we think of housing as a continuum, and on the one end of the continuum you have market ownership, and then you might have rental housing, then affordable rental, then transitional housing where people are provided with supports for mental health or addiction, then you have social housing, and then you have emergency shelters. If you look at that entire continuum, we need our housing strategies to be addressing the entire continuum. Because when there's a problem in any part, people kind of get bumped down and there's constant downward pressure. So you could easily argue that one of the reasons why our shelter system is over capacity is because we haven't been building the affordable rental. So when people can't access affordable rental, they end up in the shelter system. So a really big part of what we need at the federal level is a strategy, a housing strategy that's looking at all of these parts.
You see that here.
Well, I see it in bits and pieces. I think the emphasis overwhelmingly, and this has to do, I think, with middle-class voters, the emphasis overwhelmingly seems to be on providing access to home ownership. That's problematic. The gap we're missing right now is really in the middle, and we also know that at 12 times the average wage, just extending debt by another 5 years isn't going to make home ownership accessible for people. Let's not fool ourselves. Instead, we should be focusing on building really high quality, affordable rental housing.
When you say we, who's the we there?
Well, I think our federal government, I agree, we finally have a federal housing strategy. It's moving in the right direction. I think it can be more aggressive on the affordable rental piece. The 11,000 rental units that we saw built in the city last year, it's important to note, a very tiny portion, like not even 5% of that 11,000 are affordable. That's luxury housing. Those are luxury rental units. Those are not affordable units. So we need to be more intentional in our strategy of ensuring that we're providing affordable rental housing, that the average wage earner, a teacher, a nurse, a planner at City Hall can actually afford housing in this city. Right now, that's not the case. There's a really big gap right in that middle part of the overall housing continuum. And that part, I think the NDP gets at it with they got the supply side right in suggesting 500,000 affordable rental homes. That's a big, bold plan.
Achievable?
That is, well, the achievability piece, I don't know. I don't think they actually provide the details on how that's going to be executed, but I would argue that none of the platforms do that. But I think we do need to set goals that actually fit with the magnitude of the problem.
And that does.
And that does. And the Greens, of course, completely missed the mark at 25,000. That's like a drop in the bucket for the whole country. That's not even enough for one city like Toronto, let alone being an objective for the entire country. The others are in the middle.
Murtaza, what do you like?
I think what you have to see is that this is an election year, and one of the largest voting bloc are the young millennials. So every party is going after first-time home buyers. I like several aspects of it. The Liberals are helping the rental construction by providing them with financing. They've put aside about $10 billion in it. I like the plan that the Conservatives are thinking about addressing the stress test for markets that are not facing housing affordability challenges. Stress test is like a vaccine that you administer to the entire nation when the problem is only in 2 cities. So why over-medicate the system? And the second thing is you have to realize that this love for first-time home buyers is missing for the first-time home renters. And the first-time home buyers actually transition more often than not from being first-time home renters. And the way to fix it is to look at what Jennifer said, not rental luxury housing, but rental that is affordable. And that would happen if you look at where we went wrong in the late 1960s or early 1970s. We implemented capital gains tax on rental markets, rental housing, and not indexed it to inflation, which meant that someone would end up paying humongous tax just on inflation, not on the actual appreciation of their rental stock.
When they sell the place.
When sell the place. So that's one thing that killed the supply of rental housing in early 70s. The other thing was vacancy decontrol implementation, which is what we call the rent control. That further helped reduce the supply of housing. You do not address these 2 things, and you will continue to complain about it.
But it has been addressed. The current progressive conservative government took off controls on today construction.
Absolutely, but
So you approve of that?
There's proof of that, but then before 1991, buildings that were constructed before 1991, and that's pretty much all of your purpose-built rental in Toronto. They're still subject to that. The question is, these are not issues where economists are confused about. These are issues where you have almost unanimous consensus that these things don't help, and the way to fix it is to look at the capital gains tax, index it to inflation, and look at the reasons if we are really helping people with rent control. Because I think the rent control does 2 things. A, it reduces the supply of rental stock. B, it worsens the quality of stock over time because the landlord has no incentive to improve it.
But C, it certainly protects the people who are already in.
Yes, at the cost of those who are not.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'll just add to that because I think that economists have one opinion, planners and builders have another. If you talk to people who build rental housing, the rental housing revitalization, if you will, began in this city in particular as a result of CMHC's rental construction financing program. When rent controls were still in place. So the rent control was not a disincentive to new rental housing being built. It was actually the challenge of accessing capital to build the project. Once CMHC fixed that problem with the rental construction financing program, which has been wildly successful, you mentioned the $10 billion allocated to that, we started to see rental housing being built again, even though rent controls were in place. If you speak to people in the industry, one of the things they'll talk about is that once you actually have your building populated, the rent control doesn't come into place until you've actually set your rents. So if you set your rents, you then can't increase your rents more than, I believe it's 1% of inflation. Very few building owners would ever increase their rents more than that because you don't want to be emptying out your building and repopulating your building. So if you get when you build a new building, if you get the price right, when you're bringing people in, you're pretty much set. So rent controls, it hasn't actually played out in the Toronto context, which is what I know about in that way, that rent controls were a disincentive in any way. The bigger issue from my perspective is that we need to be focusing specifically on the affordable rental stock because all of that rental housing that has been built has actually been way, way beyond the affordable category. And for the newcomers coming into this city, the challenge is how do you access housing? During the campaign, I had a man from Croatia come up to me and he said, I came here in the 80s and I came here with $50 in a suitcase. And I can tell you that 25 years later, my kids went to the best private schools in this city. I own a house in Forest Hill. And I look at what's happening in the city right now, and I'm terrified because you can't do what I did in the 80s. You can no longer do in this city. And so I think that's our great risk, is that there are people who are coming to this city, and also young people, those young millennials, who don't stand a fighting chance. They're coming out of school with more debt than ever and can't actually access housing. They're going into debt before they even own a home. And that's new. It used to be that owning a home was that moment where you took on significant debt. Now young people have debt.
They're already there.
And they don't have a home yet.
Can you give us a sense of the lay of the land in the Kitchener-Waterloo region in terms of what affordable rental housing is available?
You know what? It's not uncommon, for example, to now see one bedrooms being at $1,100 or $1,200 a month. And that's a significant increase over the past 12 to 18 months. In fact, we've had some of the highest increases in the country in our area. And that's why affordability, I can tell you, is a big issue. We're just doing an update on our economic development strategy. And whether we were talking with people in the tech field, people in the development field, everyone was saying affordability needs to be a priority. And I think the point here, Steve, is that what in my view is absolutely key is this is not a solution that the feds, the province, or municipalities can solve on their own. It needs to be done with all three orders of government working together with the private sector. We need to be more intentional in terms of looking at things like inclusionary zoning, because there's some question in terms of how that's going to go forward provincially. And if we don't have that alignment happening between those four partners, we're really going to have challenges in dealing with this issue.
I have a follow-up question. This is not a facetious question. I don't know. Do you carry a party card?
Do I carry a party card? I don't at the moment, no.
Were you a member of a political party?
I was in the past.
Which
yes.
one?
The Liberals.
Okay. For your vision, as you've just outlined it to come true, do we need a federal Liberal government, a provincial Liberal government, sympathetic Liberals at the municipal level? Or can different parties actually talk to each other and make deals on this stuff?
I think we've seen many examples historically in this country where parties of different stripes, federally and provincially, or quite frankly, even situations with minority governments, which we might be talking about this time around, have been able to work together. In fact, the gas tax originally came forward during the Paul Martin years, which was a minority government working together with Jack Layton's NDPs at the time.
Okay. We have not put a platform out for the People's Party of Canada, but we should say, in fairness to them, that they are putting forward a solution to the affordability housing problem. And part of their solution is cut back on immigration, cut back on the numbers of people who come to the bigger cities in this province, and therefore you won't need as much supply as if you allow 320,000 people into the country every year. Steve, your view on that option?
Well, I think, obviously allowing immigrants into the country is a great thing for the country, and there's a lot of reasons we do it. Just a few years ago, the emphasis was more on how we're going to be able to fund our aging population and the increased demand for services. So looking at Toronto, we can see that the oldest population is growing 3.5 times faster than the rest of the population. They cost 4 times more for healthcare alone, let alone numerous other things like housing when they may need it as they're aging. So there's a lot of costs that are going to go up, and if we just have an aging population with an insufficient supply of labor, we're not going to be able to afford that over the long run. I think the broader question in the short run is, can we build enough supply to actually help address the shortfalls in supply versus demand? And I think that's a little bit more of the question, is not like, do we need immigrants? We clearly do. You can see why we need the tax base in the long run. It's how do we make this transition as painless as possible?
Murtaza, in terms of cutting back immigration by, say, 50% to take the demands off housing, what do you think of that idea?
When you come up with an electoral program without arithmetic behind it, this is the kind of thinking that goes into it. You look at the reports from Conference Board of Canada. Between now and, let's say, 2030, the number of students we will graduate from high school, from universities and institutions of higher learning, we would have a gap of about 1.5 million highly educated workers needed to keep the Canadian economy going at the pace that would grow even at moderate 2% level. And if
we cut immigration at half.
If there's no immigration, if you don't actually boost up your immigration to the level that we need, we are looking for 2 million workers needed by 2030 that would not be graduating from Canadian universities because they're not there. We already see that high school students and then our supply lines are choking. So immigrants we need not because of charity, because we are running a country. You look at what happens when you bring in immigrants. 2 days ago, 2 immigrants won an economics Nobel in the US. These are the things where immigrants are driving the economy. You walk into any engineering faculty in any university in Canada, and most of the students working in engineering labs in innovative, not just majority, most students are immigrants. You cannot sustain the pipeline for innovation in Canada without immigrants, and that's a reality.
Okay, I don't want to let the clock get away from me here, so let's move on and talk about transit now, because we want to compare the plans that the 4 major political parties seeking your vote on the 21st have for transportation. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring these graphics up, and I'll go into some detail for those listening on podcast. The Liberals would keep up with increasing costs by adding $3 billion in funding per year. They would tie transit funding to investment in zero-emission transit vehicles starting in the year 2023, and they would start a so-called National Infrastructure Fund to support the biggest projects. The Conservatives, conversely, would scrap the Canada Infrastructure Bank. They say it's not working well. They would revive the public transit tax credits that Stephen Harper brought in some years ago, and they would commit to funding for the Ontario Line and the Yonge Subway Extension projects that at the moment the Ontario government is backing. The New Democrats, they want to electrify transit fleets by the year 2030. They want to work with municipalities to make transit fare-free. And they want to reestablish rural bus services. The Greens, finally, would like to build high-speed rail in the Toronto, Ottawa, Quebec City Triangle and the Calgary-Edmonton corridor. They are aiming for zero-carbon public ground transportation by the year 2040, focusing on rail and electric bus. And if you want to buy a bike, they would take the GST off the cost of a bicycle. Okay, again, let's go around the horn here and just see what everybody thinks of what do they like here. Jennifer, start us off.
Well, okay, I'll start with what I like. I think for the first time in my adult life, working in this profession, over the course of the past 4 years, we saw real monies being allocated to transit through the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund. And unfortunately, there's a lot of projects across this country that are advancing. They aren't complete yet, but they're advancing as a result of that cycle and the availability of funding, which was made available based on ridership. So previously, what happened was Prince Edward Island got similar funding to the City of Toronto because the way the formula worked, and there was a little bit of extra money that was given to smaller communities, and it really was insignificant in terms of being able to advance large infrastructure projects. But what's called Pta funding, that public transit infrastructure funding that was brought in over the past 4 years, was a game changer. And many of the projects that are advancing across Canada today are advancing because there was that stable source of funding, a reliable funding that was put in place. The expansion of that, adding an additional billions and billions of dollars to that is a really, really good thing.
Just let me jump in for a second.
So scrapping that is problematic in my mind. It means starting over when we've actually spent the past 4 years building some infrastructure around how you actually advance transit.
I assume you're good with the Conservatives committing the billions required to build the Ontario and Yonge Street extensions? The Ontario line and the Yonge Street
I'm not a
extension?
huge fan of the Yonge Street extension because I'm an evidence-based planner, but the relief line, absolutely. And we know that that's been a little bit of a punching ball, and the name has changed, and there's some confusion about that right now. What I'm concerned about from a national lens is having the infrastructure in place. So the biggest problem as a planner is if you don't have the funding, it's really difficult to advance the very first stage, which is the planning. And what the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund did, that there was money from that fund allocated to my team planning the relief line. That's why it's advancing. But this isn't just about Ontario. In BC, there are major transit infrastructure projects, including the SkyTrain extension to UBC, that have also been advanced as a result of that funding. So it's not about give us a project and we'll fund it. That's no long-term strategy. What's powerful about the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund is that it sets criteria, municipalities apply. If your project meets the criteria, then you can access the funding. So it allows municipalities
Not a one-off
to plan.
approach, no.
It's not saying, oh, you've got a project?
it.
Sure. It's an election campaign. We'll fund that project. It's actually a rational, evidence-based approach that puts in place larger infrastructure to advance transit planning, not just in Toronto. Oh, Toronto voters want the relief line, we'll give them that. That's not what it is. It's actually it's a systematic approach, and it was what we as professionals had been advocating for. We'd been saying, look, we can't plan transit infrastructures when there's funding here one day, gone the next, or when it's all driven by an election campaign. You want this project, we'll promise that in our election campaign. Pta Funding, in some ways, the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund rises above that and actually puts a mechanism in place.
Takes the politics out.
It takes the politics out. It's a very good
Having
thing.
said that, I'm going to ask a politician what he thinks. Okay,
hope
Your
you
Worship,
agree.
what do you like here?
You know what? I couldn't agree more with Jennifer in terms of the importance of the Pta Fund and the fact that it gave municipalities the ability to have predictability and to plan for investments in transit infrastructure going forward. The current program went through to 27-28. The FCM ask was to see another 10 years put onto it through to 37-38, which would have added another $30 billion, given municipalities long-term planning windows based on ridership. But there was also a call for $4 billion additional money for those that wanted to make transformational changes in their communities. So you look at a community like ours that historically just relied on buses, went to an LRT. We've seen huge success with it, and now we're ready to go to phase 2 from Kitchener down to Cambridge. We're doing the EA for it, and we're ready to move forward. We're not sure, is the funding going to be in place?
What's the price tag on that?
Don't know yet because we're just, like I said, finishing the EA. Our original one was just shy of $900 million in terms of North Waterloo to South Central Kitchener.
And would the feds put in for that?
So that was under the old funding mechanism, was basically one-third, one-third, one-third. So our region actually said, this is a priority. So, I'm not sort of, I will say I'm a little envious of my colleagues who are getting full funding now. And certainly for phase 2, that's our hope and expectation.
Got it. Murtaza, your view of those transit plans as you just saw them?
They are necessary. Public transit is very important for the success of labor markets, urban labor markets. And if you look at larger cities like New York and Berlin and London, England, public transit is the sort of the main artery, the main vehicle of sustaining the labor markets. But I must say this, that this is a federal election. It's not a municipal election, right? And if you look at across Canada, what percentage of people who live in areas who can benefit from public transit. My estimate is about 7 million out of 37 million in Canada. Why I say this is you look at the big cities, the Torontos of the world, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Ottawa. So that's about 7 million that can benefit from transit in markets where you can have, let's say, 20% more split for work trips. That is, 20% of the trips to work are made by public transit. The rest of Canada relies on automobile. The rest of Canada relies on using roads to get to work, right? So we should not be looking at a national transport policy that only talks about transit because it serves the urban needs, and I understand that. But we have to be very mindful of the mobility needs of communities that are not in a position and will not be in a position for a foreseeable future to have a viable public transit system.
Would you want governments, though, to introduce policies that aim to get more people out of their cars and onto public transit?
Absolutely. As I said, any facility that helps us reduce our reliance on private automobile is the right strategy. But then at the same time, if you look at the electoral platforms, you see inconsistencies that are coming up. For example, gas tax. I know people want to use or increase gas tax, but all these political parties want to get to electric vehicles. And you would see what U.S. has already seen, a reduction in gas tax revenue, which is causing them problems in funding public transit infrastructure because the capital expenditure were coming from gas tax, and already we're seeing a decline in gas tax revenue. Eventually, these vehicles would become electric vehicles. There will be no gas tax.
Gotcha. Steve, I got a minute and a half left. Go ahead. What do you like?
Yeah, so I think what a number of people have mentioned in terms of the positives, in terms of actually investing in transit. One of the things that we found in Vital Signs was in Toronto, 2/3 of the unemployed people lived in the areas of the city with the lowest access to transit. So when you are talking about giving people access to job, actually having transit networks that work for people is really critical on that aspect. I do think the other thing is cost is a barrier for low-income people to use transit, even as it exists. So when there are credits for and things like that, or different ways to actually make the individual use of transit improve, that can be a big differentiator. So if you look at the TTC as an example, over the last 20 years, it's been increasing. The fares have been increasing at twice the rate of inflation, and a big part of that's because we have such low operating subsidies per rider. I mean, of any system in North America, a recent study suggested we had the lowest, and that means, of course, that we're forced to rely on transit fares for people to pay, which is puts those who are most at risk in terms of being able to afford it, meaning they have the least access to transit when we are increasing the fares continually to be able to pay for the transit that we already have and keep it operating.
Probably fair to say it doesn't encourage anybody to take transit who otherwise wouldn't, but it does give you a little break if you're already doing it. I mean, I think that's what the empirical evidence showed last time it was brought in. Okay, good.
May I say this? That
If you got 10 seconds.
10 seconds. That my colleague Stephen Farber at the University of Toronto did a very good study of looking at what would improve accessibility to employment. And their study is very clear. It says it's improving accessibility, but vehicles, automobiles, improves the odds of getting to a job far more, not just marginally, far more than public transit. So when I say that accessibility to employment is tied to cars, it's true for Toronto as well, because we have seen this through scientific studies, not just conjecture.
Talk about inaccessibility. I have no more accessibility to time. We're done. Jennifer, Barry, Stephen, Murtaza, it's great to have all of you on TVO tonight. Thanks for coming in and sharing your views on election 43. Here we go.
Wow. It's gonna be
Thanks, everybody.
interesting.
Yeah, it sure is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.